Desire has always lived in the shadows, hidden in whispered prayers, passed down through ancient recipes, traded in secret, sold in silk-lined bottles. For thousands of years, humans have searched for ways to make themselves irresistible, to spark love, to spark lust, or to spark control. But what if the real story of Aphrodisiacs isn't just about pleasure, but about power? I'm True Crime Echoes, and this is True Crime Echoes, where we uncover the darker histories behind the things we think we understand. In this episode, we're not just talking about potions and perfumes, we're talking about control, obsession, manipulation, crime, and how far people have gone and still go in the name of being desired. This is a story about the human condition dressed up in myth medicine, and sometimes murder. Chapter 1: Love, Lust, and the Potion We Keep Chasing. I used to think aphrodisiacs were just a silly little myth, something you read about in the back of an old magazine or in some ancient love spell recipe your best friend's cousin found on Tumblr back in 2009. But the more I looked into it, I realized something deeper was going on. This wasn't just about oysters or chocolates or herbs from faraway forests. It was about desire, control, power, and sometimes danger. For centuries, people have been chasing something, a feeling, a spark, a shortcut to intimacy. Whether it was a desperate king trying to produce an heir, a heartbroken woman trying to win back her lover, or a bored aristocrat looking for stimulation. Everyone wanted something to make them feel more alive, more wanted, more loved. Aphrodisiacs, those so-called love potions, promised that. And they've shown up everywhere. In food, in perfumes, in folklore, in whispered conversations behind locked doors. From Cleopatra to Casanova, from sacred rituals to scandalous crimes, aphrodisiacs have woven themselves into the fabric of human history. But here's the thing that really gets me. We never really stopped believing in them. Not really. Even today, they're all around us, just hidden in fancier packaging. Marketed as natural boosters or wellness enhancers or performance blends. We might laugh at ancient people grinding up rhino horn or chasing whale vomit, but then we turn around and drop $75 on some viral supplement we saw on TikTok that promises to make us irresistible. It's funny, the tools change, but the need stays the same. And the need is ancient. That need to be wanted, desired, to feel like you matter to someone in that very primal, intimate way. But that need, it's also dangerous. Because when someone wants control or when someone feels powerless, they might reach for something stronger than words, something they think can bend someone else's will. And that's when aphrodisiacs stop being romantic and start being dark. When I first started researching this episode, I thought it would be lighthearted. Funny even. I mean oysters and chocolate. Come on. But the more I dug in, the more I realized how tangled this topic is with superstition, exploitation, pseudoscience, and yes, true crime. There were real victims, real manipulation, and sometimes real death. So today I want to take you on a journey not just through the myths and the magic, but through the ugly parts too. We're going to meet gods and goddesses, kings and killers, lovers and liars. Some of them believed in the power of love. Others weaponized it. And by the end of this, you might find yourself wondering, were these potions ever about love at all? Or were they always about something else? So settle in. We're going deep into the strange, seductive, and sometimes horrifying world of aphrodisiacs, from ancient elixirs to poison chocolates, from sea creatures to scandalous French nobility. You're not going to look at oysters the same way again. I promise. Let's begin. Chapter 2: The Goddess, the Shell, and the Myth of Desire. Let's start where a lot of this obsession began, with the goddess of love herself, Aphrodite. You've probably seen the painting, right? The one with the naked woman standing in a giant seashell, her long hair flowing that dreamy gaze. It's been printed on mugs, posters, memes. She's everywhere. That's Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love, beauty, and desire. But what most people don't realize is that her origin story, it's not just romantic. It's brutal. Like really brutal. According to mythology, Aphrodite wasn't just born from sea foam. She was born from violence. Her father Uranus was overthrown by his own son Cronus. And in one of the most graphic family betrayals in ancient stories, Cronus sliced off his father's genitals and threw them into the sea. Yeah, that happened, and from the foam that rose out of the water from the remains of a god's severed masculinity emerged Aphrodite, floating on the ocean, radiant and powerful, the embodiment of love rising from literal violence and chaos, kind of poetic in a dark way. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Because she came from the sea, anything ocean-related shells, pearls, sea creatures became linked to her. And that's how we got the idea that oysters were sexy. Yeah, that's where it comes from. Not science, not nutrition. A severed penis and some foam. I mean, think about it. Oysters are slippery, salty, a little mysterious, and honestly, kind of resemble something. You know what I mean. People started associating their texture and shape with the female anatomy. And boom, the oyster became a symbol of sensuality, of fertility, of Aphrodite's power. Now, I've always been a little suspicious of oysters. I mean, they smell like the ocean floor and feel like swallowing a cold, wet loogie. But hey, to each their own. Still, even now, oysters show up on romantic dinner menus. They're considered an aphrodisiac, a sexy food. And for a long time, that was enough. If something looked sensual or reminded people of sex, it got labeled as an aphrodisiac. No one asked for studies, no one needed proof. The myth was stronger than the science, but oysters weren't always accessible. Not everyone lived by the coast or could afford fresh seafood, so people turned to other things: fruits, roots, spices, pretty much anything that could be connected even loosely to love, fertility, or pleasure. There's something so human about that, isn't there? Wanting to believe in symbols, in signs, in little magical shortcuts that could help us find love or be wanted. Whether it was an oyster, a fig, or a glass of wine infused with herbs, the idea was the same. Maybe if I eat this, someone will want me. But even in those early myths, the ones that sound almost innocent now, there was already this thread of control, of wanting to spark desire not naturally but by force, through a potion, a food, a spell. A way to skip the messy, unpredictable parts of human connection. It didn't stay innocent for long. In fact, some of the earliest recorded aphrodisiacs weren't just symbolic. They were dangerous, toxic even. And the people who used them, they weren't always just lonely. Some of them were powerful, ruthless, willing to manipulate, even poison, to get what they wanted. And that's where we're headed next. Because if you thought oysters were strange, wait until you hear about the next so-called love potion. One that came from a root that looked like a human body. A root that could heal, curse, or kill. A root so feared, people thought it would scream if you pulled it from the ground. Let's talk about the mandrake. Chapter 3. The mandrake root and the dangerous art of desire. If oysters were the sensual appetizer in our story, the mandrake root was the dark, forbidden main course. I remember the first time I saw a picture of a mandrake root. Honestly, it freaked me out. It looked like a tiny, shriveled human arm's legs, sometimes even what looked like a little face. It was like something out of a fantasy novel. But the truth is, for thousands of years, people believed this root wasn't just a plant. It was powerful, magical, and extremely dangerous. The mandrake has a long history in mythology and medicine, but it's most famous for its reputation. In ancient times, people believed that if a plant resembled a human body, it held special powers over humans. And the mandrake, with its unsettling shape, became a symbol of love, fertility, and seduction. It was said that if you used it properly, you could attract anyone you desired. If you steeped it in wine, made a potion, or even just carried it with you, it would awaken desire in others. Not just emotional affection, but carnal longing, lust, the kind of love that doesn't ask permission. But here's where things get dark. There was a legend, and it wasn't a small one. It was believed that when you pulled a mandrake from the earth, it would scream, literally scream. And if you heard that scream, you'd die. Just drop dead on the spot. Because the mandrake wasn't meant to be disturbed. It wasn't just a plant, it was a spirit, a being. Now, obviously, that's mythology. But the fear was so strong that people came up with elaborate rituals to harvest it. Some tied the root to a dog, then covered their ears and let the dog pull it up. The dog would die instead of the person. I mean, imagine believing in the power of something so deeply that you're willing to sacrifice a living animal just to obtain it. But even if it didn't kill you on the spot, the mandrake root wasn't exactly safe. It's filled with psychoactive compounds, things that in small doses can make you feel warm, relaxed, a little loopy. But in large doses, it's toxic, hallucinogenic, potentially fatal. That didn't stop people from using it, though, especially in love potions. Throughout ancient Greece, Rome, the Middle Ages, even into the Renaissance, mandrake root was considered one of the most powerful aphrodisiacs in existence. Mixed into wine or vinegar, it was said to lower inhibitions, spark passion, and open the body to pleasure. But here's the question I kept coming back to while researching this. Did it really work? Or did people just think it worked? Because the truth is, a lot of these so-called aphrodisiacs weren't effective because of what they did to the body, but because of what people believed they would do. That's the power of the placebo effect. If you think you're drinking a love potion, your brain might respond accordingly. You might feel more confident, more aroused, more open. Not because of the potion, but because of the belief. And when you think about it, that's even more powerful and more dangerous than the ingredients themselves, because belief can make people do wild things. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. In ancient societies, especially ones where starvation and malnutrition were common, food itself was often considered an aphrodisiac. Rich, fatty foods, meats, spices, because when your body is deprived, when you're constantly hungry, the last thing it wants is romance. You're in survival mode. So anything that made people feel nourished, alive, full, also made them feel well, frisky. Which makes sense. You can't chase pleasure when you're starving. And that's where desire and survival start to blur together. People weren't just using mandrake or oysters or wine because they wanted to be sexy. Sometimes they were trying to hold on to fertility, to reproduction, to the continuation of their bloodlines in a world where disease, war, and famine were constant threats. But other times, people weren't using aphrodisiacs for connection or creation. They were using them for control, for manipulation, for power. And that's when the line gets crossed. Because when someone drinks a potion willingly hoping to spark something real, that's one thing. But when someone slips it into a drink without consent, that's something else entirely. And unfortunately, history is full of those stories too. So as we move forward, keep that in mind. Because the next chapter of this story isn't just about plants or myths. It's about institutions. About how even powerful systems like the church used the fear of desire to control entire populations, especially women. Let's talk about that. Chapter 4. The Church Witches and the War Against Pleasure. You know what's wild? For something as natural and human as desire, history has spent a lot of time trying to suppress it, or worse, punish it. And if we're being honest, a lot of that repression comes back to one place, the church. Specifically the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages. Now, before I go further, this isn't about attacking religion, but it is about understanding how belief systems, especially powerful ones, shaped the way people viewed sex, love, and their own bodies. And sometimes those beliefs turned deadly. Back then, the church didn't just see sex as taboo. They saw it as sacred, but only under one condition: it had to be for reproduction. That's it. If you were having sex for any reason other than making a baby, it was considered sinful. Pleasure, intimacy, passion, all dangerous distractions from holiness. And of course, who got blamed the most for tempting people into sin? Women. Always women. It didn't matter if she was a midwife helping other women with fertility, or a healer using herbs to calm someone's pain. If a woman understood the human body too well, she was suspicious. If she understood her own body, even worse. Because in the eyes of the church, knowledge, especially about pleasure, equaled power. And power in the hands of women, that was a threat. That's why so many women were accused of being witches. It wasn't just about casting spells or dancing under the moon. It was about control. Controlling birth, controlling pain, controlling pleasure. In fact, there were actual accusations that witches were causing men to lose their erections. I wish I were joking. Historical documents written by priests, bishops, actual scholars of the time warned men that witches might be the reason they were impotent. They believed these women were casting dark spells, using herbs and potions to sabotage fertility, to keep babies from being born, and to steal men's virility. So what was the church's solution? They told men, yes, you can take aphrodisiacs, but only if you pray first. I'm serious. You could sip on a love potion rub, on some strange oil, even mix mandrake into your wine, just as long as you whispered a little prayer first and promised it wasn't for pleasure, only for procreation. The contradictions were everywhere. On one hand, sex was shameful. On the other, the population was declining because of disease, famine, and plague, and the church needed people to reproduce. So suddenly aphrodisiacs were a necessary evil. And guess who stepped in to fill the demand? Women. Again, herbalists, healers, midwives. The same women who were being burned at the stake were also the ones people turned to in secret, desperate for help for fertility, for intimacy, for hope. It's hard to wrap your head around it. One moment a woman is trusted enough to deliver your baby. The next, she's accused of witchcraft because she knows which herb relieves cramps, or which flower helps with desire. There was this impossible line they were expected to walk, help people, but not too much. Understand the body, but not too well. Especially not your own body. That was dangerous. That was deviant. And what gets me the most is how easily fear can be weaponized. The fear of infertility, the fear of lust, the fear of a woman having power that doesn't come from a man. All of it got twisted into a justification for control. And behind that control, institutions, the church, the state, the men who benefited from keeping women small and silent. But here's what they didn't count on. Women didn't stop. Even in the shadows, even with their lives at risk, they kept learning, experimenting, and passing down knowledge. Not just about healing, but about pleasure too. About reclaiming something sacred. So yes, aphrodisiacs had their roots in folklore and superstition. But they were also part of something much bigger, a quiet resistance. Still, that resistance came at a cost. And as trade routes opened and the world expanded, so did the market for aphrodisiacs, and with demand came danger. In the next chapter, we're diving into something a little messier, something expensive, mysterious, and kind of disgusting. Let's talk about the world's most valuable and strangest love ingredient, one that came straight from the gut of a whale. Ambergris. Chapter 5. Ambergris. Whale guts and royal desires. Okay, I'm just going to say it. Some of the things humans have put into their bodies in the name of love are absolutely disgusting. And one of the strangest, hands down, is something called ambergris. Now, if you've never heard of it, don't worry. Most people haven't. But for hundreds of years, ambergris was considered one of the most luxurious, rare, and expensive substances on Earth. It was used in perfume, in medicine, and yes, as an aphrodisiac. But here's the kicker: ambergris is literally whale vomit. Or at least, whale poop. No one's really sure which. Let me explain. Ambergris is this waxy, grayish lump that forms inside the digestive system of sperm whales. It's believed to help the whale pass sharp, indigestible objects like squid beaks. Yeah, squids have beaks. That's a thing I wish I didn't know, but now you know too. So basically, when a sperm whale eats something hard and can't digest it, its body coats it in this substance, ambergris, to protect its insides. Eventually, that mass gets either thrown up or passed out the other end. Either way, it ends up floating in the ocean until someone finds it washed up on a beach. And for centuries, people were obsessed with it. No one really knew what it was. At first, it just had this musky, earthy scent that somehow aged beautifully. The longer it sat, the better it smelled. Like wine, but whale. And in a world before synthetic fragrance, that smell, it was liquid gold. People believed ambergris had all kinds of powers. It could heal, excite, stimulate. It was mixed into wine, applied to the skin, eaten in desserts. Some even claimed it had spiritual properties, that it could heighten the senses, awaken desire, and bring the body into balance, whatever that means. One of ambergrise's biggest fans was King Louis XV of France. He allegedly used it to flavor his food. Not just his perfume or bathwater, his food. Like imagine sitting down to dinner and someone says, "Oh yes, tonight's special is roast duck glazed with whale intestine resin." Romantic, right? The smell of ambergris was so unique, so intoxicating that people were willing to pay outrageous sums for even the smallest piece. It was called floating gold, and in some cultures it was believed to be the ultimate aphrodisiac. Exotic. Rare, mysterious, and just dangerous enough to make it irresistible. What fascinates me the most is how little people questioned what they were actually using. Like no one cared that this stuff came out of an animal's digestive tract. If anything, that added to its appeal. Because the more unusual something was, the more powerful people assumed it must be. That logic carried a lot of weight back then. And maybe it still does. I mean, even today, traces of ambergris can still be found in high-end perfumes. Not all of them most use synthetic versions now, but some niche luxury brands still brag about the natural origin of their ingredients. Translation: yes, you're literally wearing whale discharge behind your ears. But it's French, so it's sexy. What's also wild is that ambergris is now illegal to trade in many countries, including the US. It's protected under the Endangered Species Act since it comes from sperm whales, and we kind of realized maybe we shouldn't be harvesting rare animals for the sake of smelling hot. But even with those protections, the legend of ambergris hasn't disappeared. There are still people combing beaches hoping to find a lump worth tens of thousands of dollars. Still people buying vintage perfume with real ambergris inside. Still whispers that maybe, just maybe, this is the secret to irresistible desire. And honestly, I think ambergris tells us more about human behavior than it does about romance. Because it's not about the scent or the science, it's about the story. It's about the idea that if something is rare enough, ancient enough, weird enough, then it must be magical. It must work. And we want so badly to believe that there's something out there that can make us more lovable, more wanted, more enough. But the truth is, when it comes to aphrodisiacs, ambergris is just the beginning, because as science advanced and empires expanded, the search for pleasure got even more complicated and way more addictive. Next, we're heading into the hazy, seductive world of opium, where desire wasn't just about chemistry, it was about control. Let's go there. Chapter 6: Opium Potions and the Science of Female Pleasure. When I think about aphrodisiacs, opium isn't the first thing that comes to mind. Honestly, I used to associate it more with addiction, colonialism, and war, not romance. But history has a way of surprising you, because there was a time not too long ago when opium was considered not just a medicine, but a tool for intimacy, and depending on who was using it and why, it could mean comfort, performance, or control. Let's rewind a bit. By the 1500s, opium was already being used across Europe and Asia for all kinds of things: pain relief, anxiety, sleep, even digestive issues. But one man, a Swiss chemist named Paracelsus, took it a step further. Paracelsus believed opium could be the stone of immortality. Not just a drug, but an elixir of life. He created a special blend called laudanum, basically opium dissolved in alcohol, and he prescribed it for everything, including sexual stamina, that's right. While other aphrodisiacs were about starting desire, Paracelsus thought opium could help men slow it down. In his eyes, if a man lasted longer, he was a better lover, a more generous partner. And somehow, that was revolutionary. It sounds strange now, but at the time, this was seen as progressive. For centuries, sex had been all about the man, his pleasure, his timing, his needs. The idea that a woman's experience should be considered radical. And that's where this story takes a fascinating turn. Because around the same period, a Dutch physician named Johannes de Gorter, later echoed by others like Lemnius, made a claim that was both shocking and kind of brilliant, that women's pleasure actually mattered. Not just emotionally, but biologically. He truly believed, that if a woman didn't enjoy sex, she couldn't conceive. Like physically, couldn't make a baby. That's how tied pleasure was to reproduction in his theory. It sounds ridiculous now, we know better. But back then, this was backed by real medical texts. Ancient Roman writings even talked about conception as a melding of two seeds. which meant if the woman didn't orgasm, there was no seed, no baby. And while we now understand that's not how reproduction works, unfortunately proven through cases of rape and assault, at the time, this belief sparked an entire movement, a push for men to not just chase their own release, but to pay attention to their partners. And suddenly, pleasure, female pleasure, was medicalized. Studied, prescribed. It became a topic for doctors, not just poets. Aphrodisiacs weren't just tools of seduction anymore, they were medicine. Legitimate treatments for infertility and frigidity, and whatever other labels they threw onto women who didn't comply. But of course, this progress had a dark side too. Because anytime science takes an interest in something that was once sacred, personal, or hidden, it opens the door for control. Regulation, abuse. Take linum, for example, a concoction that included opium, crushed coral pearls, amber, and even powdered deer horn. It was sold as a kind of super potion for men, a way to increase stamina, desire, and masculine power. And yes, sometimes it worked. Mostly because opium dulled the nerves and slowed everything down. But there's something deeply ironic about using a sedative to spark desire. Right? Like how far are we willing to go to chase a feeling that's supposed to be natural? And honestly, that's what I kept coming back to during this part of the research. How fragile our relationship with pleasure really is. Especially when it comes to women. Because on one side, society was finally admitting, hey, maybe women deserve to enjoy sex too. But on the other side, it still placed the responsibility of that pleasure on women themselves. If a woman didn't feel desire, she was the problem. She was cold, broken, needing to be fixed with herbs, potions, or pills. Very few people asked why she might feel disconnected in the first place, or whether her partner was, doing his job. So while opium and other love medicines opened the door to some important conversations, they also blurred the line between healing and performance, between care and control. And let's not forget, opium is addictive. People who used it for pleasure often found themselves needing it for survival. Their tolerance increased, their bodies changed, their desires became chemically dependent, and that turned something as beautiful as intimacy into something mechanical, compulsive, even dangerous. It's a reminder that every tool, every shortcut comes with a price, and by the 1700s, that price was starting to show. Because while opium and other aphrodisiacs promised connection, what people really wanted underneath it all was power, and nobody understood that better than the ancient empires, especially the Aztecs. In the next chapter, we're crossing oceans and stepping into a world where chocolate wasn't just a treat. It was a magical royal potion used to enchant, seduce, and even enslave. Let's talk about that. Chapter 7, Chocolate Empire and the Bittersweet Taste of Desire. I used to think of chocolate as something innocent. Like comfort food, a reward after a long day, a last-minute gift when you forget someone's birthday. But the truth is, chocolate has a much darker, stranger history, one tied to power seduction and even spiritual manipulation. Long before it became something we grabbed at the checkout line, chocolate was sacred, especially in the ancient Aztec and Inca civilizations. They didn't eat it in bars or melt it into fondue. Back then, chocolate was a bitter, frothy drink called zocolatl, made from roasted cacao beans, spices, and water. No sugar, no milk, just intensity. And it wasn't just a drink, it was a ritual. The Aztecs believed cacao came directly from the gods, gifted to humans to bring vitality, fertility, and spiritual clarity. It was linked to Xochiquetzal, their goddess of beauty, love, and fertility. So naturally, cacao became deeply embedded in their ideas of power, sexuality, and even warfare. This wasn't just romantic symbolism. Chocolate was used in love magic spells and potions intended to sway someone's heart or body toward you. If someone wasn't interested, a cup of spiced cacao might change their mind. At least that was the hope. And the most obsessed of them all, the Aztec emperor, Montezuma II. According to historical accounts, and yes, some exaggeration from European observers, Montezuma drank dozens of cups of chocolate every day. Some sources say 50, others claim he had an entire court staff whose only job was to prepare cacao-based drinks for him. all day, every day, but it wasn't just indulgence. Montezuma believed chocolate gave him strength, stamina, and according to the records, enhanced his romantic abilities. He'd send cups of it to women he wanted to impress or seduce. It was basically the imperial version of "Can I buy you a drink?" And apparently it worked. He had hundreds of concubines and wives, and chocolate was his gateway to intimacy. But here's where things get a little more complicated, because the same cacao beans that symbolized love and divinity were also a form of currency. They literally used cacao as money, which meant that pleasure and power were directly tied to wealth and control. The poor didn't drink cacao, they couldn't afford it. It was reserved for the elite, the rulers, the warriors, the priests, so the connection between chocolate and aphrodisiacs wasn't just about biology, it was about status. Only the powerful had access to divine pleasure. And when European colonizers arrived and saw how revered chocolate was, they didn't just take the recipe, they took the myth. They brought cacao back to Europe, dressed it up with sugar and cream, and sold it to their own elite as an exotic sensual delicacy. By the time it reached 18th century France and Italy, chocolate was firmly rooted as an aphrodisiac for the upper class. It was luxurious, mysterious, and to many arousing, not because of what it did to the body, but because of what it represented. No one knew that better than Giacomo Casanova. Yes, that Casanova. The infamous lover, writer, and seducer of women all across Europe. Casanova was absolutely obsessed with chocolate. He believed it gave him stamina and heightened his senses. According to his own memoirs, he used chocolate the same way Montezuma did, to impress, to invite, to seduce. He'd serve chocolate mousse spiked with special ingredients, sometimes even ambergris, to the women he brought to bed. He believed it set the tone, created a mood, opened the door. And again, we see the same pattern: power, sex, desire, all wrapped up in something people were eating. But what fascinates me is how easily the line blurred between consumption and consent. Because in many cases, women weren't told what was in the drink. They didn't know if it had herbs, spices, animal byproducts, or even drugs. The expectation was, accept the offer and see what happens. And that's where aphrodisiacs get really dangerous, when the person being enchanted doesn't know what's in the cup. What started as a ritual of the gods, a sacred connection between earth and body, eventually became a tool for manipulation. Chocolate wasn't just a gift, it was a trap. A quiet way to gain control over someone else's will, their attraction, their body. And when you look at it that way, chocolate loses a bit of its sweetness. Even now, we still romanticize it. Advertisements show it as the ultimate symbol of love. A Valentine's Day essential. But rarely do we talk about where that idea came from, the power dynamics it was built on, or the exploitation hiding beneath its surface. The legacy of chocolate as an aphrodisiac is beautiful and bitter, just like the drink it once was. But if you think Casanova was decadent, wait until you meet the man who took things way too far. A man whose obsession with pleasure crossed every boundary, legal, moral, and physical. Up next, we're entering the twisted world of the Marquis de Sade, the man who turned aphrodisiacs into weapons and desire into something terrifying. You've been warned. Chapter 8. The Marquis de Sade, when pleasure becomes a crime. By the time I reached the story of the Marquis de Sade, I wasn't surprised anymore. Not really. I'd already read about chocolate being used as a love spell, whale guts being turned into perfume, and dangerous roots disguised as potions. But nothing prepared me for him. Because this isn't a story about desire. It's a story about domination. And if aphrodisiacs have always existed on a spectrum from the playful to the predatory, the Marquis de Sade didn't just cross the line, he erased it. He was born in Paris in 1740 into one of the oldest and wealthiest aristocratic families in France. He grew up surrounded by privileged servants and every kind of indulgence you can imagine. But even as a child, there were signs that something wasn't right. He was violent, entitled, cruel. At just 4 years old, he allegedly beat up a young prince so badly that his family sent him away to live with his uncle, a man who it turns out was even worse. That uncle introduced him to explicit literature and let him indulge in whatever twisted curiosities he had. No boundaries, no consequences. By his teenage years, the Marquis was already obsessed with sex pain and power, and as he got older, those obsessions got darker. He sought out sex workers not just for pleasure, but for control, forcing them into humiliating, dangerous situations, then bribing them to stay silent. But the world started to notice. In 1768, on Easter Sunday, the Marquis lured a young woman into his home under the promise of work. Once inside, he tied her up, cut her skin, and poured hot wax into her wounds. She survived. Barely. His family paid her to stay quiet. But word got out. People started whispering. The press picked up the rumors. And for the first time, the Marquis de Sade was exposed for what he really was. But here's the horrifying part that didn't stop him. It seemed to excite him. He escalated. He became obsessed with aphrodisiacs, not for himself, but as a weapon. Something to use on others. His favorite A substance, called Spanish fly. It's made from the ground-up bodies of blister beetles and contains a chemical called cantharidin. In small doses, it can cause irritation and inflammation, especially in the urinary tract. In larger doses, it's toxic, potentially fatal. But back then, it was marketed as a powerful aphrodisiac, something to spark desire, or at least simulate it. And the Marquis. He used it to poison people. In one of his most infamous incidents in 1772, he invited several sex workers to a party at a home he rented in the south of France. He served them chocolate candies laced with an enormous amount of Spanish fly. Within hours, the women were violently ill. Vomiting, convulsing, bleeding. Some sources say they nearly died. And what did he do? He fled. Left them there. It was the final straw. Authorities charged him with poisoning and sodomy and sentenced him to death in absentia. But once again, his wealth and privilege helped him escape the consequences. He avoided execution, went into hiding, and continued his crimes for years, in and out of prison, writing graphic, violent novels from his cell. That's actually where the word sadism comes from, his name, the Marquis de Sade, and it's disturbing how many people romanticized him, turned him into a symbol of sexual freedom or rebellion or avant-garde art. But when you strip away the philosophy and the provocation, what you're left with is this: a man who drugged women without their consent. A man who weaponized pleasure, who used aphrodisiacs not to connect, but to control. What scares me the most is how easily it happened. How something that was once sacred, a symbol of fertility and love, was turned into something cruel. How society looked away again and again because he was rich, because he was male, because he was powerful. The story of the Marquis de Sade isn't just about him. It's about all the systems that protected him, the families who paid off victims, the courts that hesitated to convict, the culture that whispered but never stopped him. And maybe that's why his legacy still lingers. Because it reminds us that desire, when distorted, can become something dangerous. That aphrodisiacs, when abused, can become weapons. And that sometimes the people who preach freedom are the ones most desperate for control. After the Marquis, everything changed. Aphrodisiacs weren't just sexy anymore. They were suspicious, dangerous, tainted. Science started stepping in, trying to separate fact from myth. And culture slowly began shifting away from the magical, messy promises of love potions. But not completely, because even as the world turned toward reason, people never stopped searching for shortcuts. They just started calling them something else. And one of the strangest and most expensive was still hiding in plain sight. It smelled awful. Came from deep inside a strange little animal. And for centuries it was called the scent of seduction. Let's talk about musk. Chapter 9. Musk, the scent of seduction and the cost of desire. I'll admit something kind of embarrassing. For years I thought musk was just a word they put on the back of perfume bottles to sound fancy, like jasmine or amber or whatever the hell noir. I never stopped to ask what musk actually was. And then I found out. And honestly, I kind of wish I hadn't. Because musk isn't a flower. It's not an oil or a spice or something exotic from a tree in the Himalayas. It's a secretion from a gland, located right next to the genitals of a small fanged animal called the musk deer. Yeah, that's where the scent of seduction really comes from. The musk deer lives in places like Tibet, Nepal, and Siberia. They're quiet, solitary creatures, no antlers, just these weird little vampire teeth and big wide eyes that make them look way too innocent for the kind of history we've written on their backs. Only the male musk deer produces musk, and he uses it for one thing: mating. During breeding season, he secretes this pungent, strong-smelling substance from a gland near his groin to mark territory and attract a female. And to other deer it works. It's nature, raw, instinctive biochemical flirting. But to humans, that smell became something else entirely. Somewhere along the way, people realized that when you dry musk down and blend it with other fragrances, it changes. It loses that sharp, almost animalistic bite and transforms into something deep, warm, and sensual. People started calling it earthy, intoxicating, irresistible, and just like that, musk became the crown jewel of the perfume industry, the ultimate aphrodisiac bottled. By the 1700s, it was everywhere. In colognes, balms, love, potions, oils. It wasn't just a scent, it was a promise. Wear this and someone will want you. Wear this and you'll be unforgettable. But no one really talked about what it cost. To harvest natural musk, you had to kill the deer. There was no ethical workaround. You couldn't milk the gland or wait for the secretion to be shed. The only way to get it was to take it. Hunters would kill the male deer, cut open its abdomen, remove the gland, and dry it like a spice. What was left was a hardened pod, a little brown pouch that looked almost like a furry beanbag. Inside was the musk powder, priceless, powerful, and soaked in the scent of survival and blood. For centuries, this practice continued so much so that musk deer populations started to collapse. They were hunted to the brink of extinction in some regions. But the demand didn't stop. Because for those who could afford it, real musk wasn't just a luxury. It was a status symbol, a hidden weapon. And the worst part? It worked. Even before science officially discovered pheromones, people instinctively knew that scent triggered something deep in the human brain, something primal, something you can't always explain. Real musk had that effect. It wasn't just about smelling good, it was about being remembered, which is why even today some luxury perfumes still use real musk. Quietly, carefully, sometimes illegally. Most brands have switched to synthetic musk lab-created replicas that mimic the scent without the animal cruelty. But for a certain kind of buyer, that's not good enough. They want the real thing. And that makes me wonder, how far are we willing to go to feel desired? We've killed whales for ambergris. We've poisoned people with beetle juice. We've extracted powder from deer genitals to make someone else lean in a little closer. And through it all, we've convinced ourselves it was worth it because it's for love, or lust, or power. But that's the trap, right? We think we're chasing intimacy, but sometimes what we're really chasing is validation. The feeling of being irresistible, chosen, seen. And when that feeling gets commodified, bottled, sold, harvested, it becomes something else entirely. I'll be honest, I can't smell musk the same way anymore. Not now. Not knowing what it cost, not knowing the history that lingers behind every sensual drop. And as we moved into the modern era, people started realizing that maybe all these legendary aphrodisiacs weren't as magical as we thought. That a lot of them were based on rumor or fear or straight-up desperation. But did that stop people from looking? Of course not. Because in the end, it was never really about science. It was about the idea, the dream. That love or desire could be summoned, sparked, controlled. And that idea, it kept evolving. In the next chapter, we're stepping into the modern age where herbs became supplements and ancient roots were rebranded as performance enhancers. Let's talk about the rise of Viagra Yohimbe and the new face of the aphrodisiac industry. Chapter 10: Modern Magic. Pills, Potions, and the Business of Desire. There's something strange about walking into a pharmacy and seeing rows of little blue bottles next to vitamin C, or scrolling through your feed and being hit with ads for natural performance boosters that promise to reignite the fire in your relationship discreetly, of course. We like to think we've evolved, that we're more rational now, more evidence-based. We scoff at love potions, eye of newt powdered pearls. We think that's old world nonsense. But deep down, we're still chasing the same thing, a shortcut to being wanted. The only difference now is branding. In the late 20th century, science gave us something that felt revolutionary: Viagra. A real tested FDA-approved medication that could actually address erectile dysfunction. And unlike ancient aphrodisiacs that relied on myth or folklore, this one worked. Consistently, measurably. At first, it was marketed purely as a medical breakthrough, a solution to a physical problem. Nothing mystical, nothing taboo, just chemistry doing its job. But it didn't take long for the narrative to shift. Suddenly, Viagra wasn't just about function, it was about masculinity, confidence, performance. Ads stopped talking about health and started talking about pleasure, about pleasing her, about feeling like your old self again. And just like that, the language of ancient aphrodisiacs crept right back in, but this time with a modern clinical smile. And Viagra wasn't alone. There were others, Cialis Levitra, and a whole black market of unregulated pills flooding online stores and gas stations. Things with names like Rhino Power or King Cobra 5000. You've seen them, you just probably looked away. But here's the thing. People buy them. All the time. Why? Because desire, or the fear of losing it, is still one of the most powerful forces in the world. And it's not just men. The supplement industry exploded with products targeting women too, promising increased libido, better orgasms, heightened sensitivity. Some were based on traditional ingredients like maca root ginseng or yohimbe, a tree bark extract that's been used in West Africa for centuries as an aphrodisiac. Yohimbe was actually prescribed by doctors at one point, but it came with side effects, anxiety, high blood pressure, even hallucinations in high doses. Eventually, it was pulled from the mainstream market in many countries, but that didn't stop it from popping up in natural sex enhancement products online. Just like everything else that gets banned, it went underground. And that's what really scares me. Because while we have more science now, more regulation, more research, the market for aphrodisiacs is still mostly fueled by desperation. Quiet, private, deeply personal desperation. And that's the perfect condition for exploitation. I've seen ads that promise to fix your marriage with a single herbal pill. Others that claim to awaken your inner goddess for $79.99 a bottle. None of them are evaluated by the FDA. Most don't list all their ingredients, and yet they rake in billions. Because here's the uncomfortable truth: when people feel unwanted or broken or ashamed, they'll try anything. And companies know that. They prey on that. They use soft lighting testimonials, pseudoscience, and ancient-sounding ingredients to make you believe this thing, this capsule, this cream, this root from a mountain you've never heard of will finally make someone love you, or at least want you again. And it's not all malicious. Some people do find confidence in these products. Some do feel better. Placebo is powerful. Hope is powerful. But we need to be honest about the line between empowerment and manipulation. Because when you're buying something out of fear, fear of rejection, of aging, of being alone, you're not really buying a product. You're buying a story, a myth. The same one people were sold 1,000 years ago in candlelit rooms with crushed herbs and whispered promises. It just comes in a nicer box now. And I think that's why the idea of aphrodisiacs hasn't disappeared, even in a world of therapy, medication, dating apps, and open conversations about sexuality. Because at the end of the day, we're not just looking for desire. We're looking for certainty. Certainty that we're lovable, that we're still enough, that we haven't lost whatever it is that makes someone want to stay. But maybe the real magic isn't in the bottle. Maybe it never was. In our final chapter, we'll take a step back. Because after all the history, the myths, the horror stories, and the billion-dollar industries, one question still remains. Why do we keep falling for the same promise over and over again? Let's talk about what aphrodisiacs really reveal about us. Chapter 11. The Heart of the Matter. What Aphrodisiacs Say About Us. After diving so deep into the strange, beautiful, and sometimes horrifying history of aphrodisiacs, I kept asking myself one question. Why? Why have we for thousands of years gone to such extremes, crushed pearls, endangered animals, deadly plants, poisons, roots, pills, beetles, whale guts, musk glands? Why did we try all of it? And I think the answer is both simple and heartbreaking, because it's never really been about sex. It's been about connection, the fear of being left behind, the ache of not being enough, the hope that something, anything, could make us desirable, lovable, worthy. Whether you were a king in a golden palace or a lonely soul with a secret stash of herbs, the longing was the same. You just wanted to be wanted, and that's what aphrodisiacs promised. Not just pleasure, but power. Not just attraction, but control. Control over how we're seen, how we're touched, how we're remembered. But control is a dangerous thing when it's tied to love. Because real intimacy, the kind that's built on trust and mutual desire, doesn't come from a bottle. It can't be forced or faked or bought. And yet, we keep trying. I think about the women throughout history who were blamed when their bodies didn't respond correctly, who were given potions or pills or prayers and told the problem was them. I think about the men who risked their health, their sanity, even their freedom, chasing that extra edge, that longer night, that better performance. And I think about all the people in between who were given aphrodisiacs without their consent, who were manipulated, drugged, violated, all in the name of love, or lust, or obsession. That's what makes this topic so complicated, because aphrodisiacs can be romantic, they can be playful, curious, even healing, but they can also be tools of exploitation, of erasure, of crime. And I guess that's the paradox of human desire. It's tender and terrifying, beautiful and brutal. We crave closeness, but we fear rejection. We want to be chosen, but we're terrified of not being enough. So we reach for whatever promises to fill that gap, even if it's made from powdered beetle shells or synthetic hormones. But maybe, just maybe, the real aphrodisiac isn't something we ingest. Maybe it's something we believe, that we're still desirable, that we're still human, that even in all our insecurities, all our aching wants, we're not alone. Because when I look back on everything, the rituals, the roots, the empires, the science, the crimes, I see a pattern. I see people trying to turn mystery into certainty, to make love predictable, measurable, controllable. But love has never been that. And desire. It's not a formula. It's a conversation, a choice, a vulnerability. And when we forget that, when we try to bottle it, sell it, or steal it, that's when things get dangerous. That's when we cross from yearning into harm. So maybe the question isn't what makes someone want me. Maybe it's what happens when I stop trying to control that and start being okay with the not knowing. That's not as easy to sell. It doesn't come with a fancy label or ancient origin story, but it might just be the most powerful potion of all. Thank you for spending this time with me, for going deep into the shadows of human desire history and everything in between. I hope this journey made you think, and maybe feel a little less alone in your own questions. Because in the end, we're all searching. And sometimes the most honest stories are the ones we don't know how to tell yet. So what started as a journey through the history of aphrodisiacs ended up revealing something deeper, something we might not always want to admit. That behind every potion, every pill, every seductive scent, is a person hoping to be seen, to be wanted, to be chosen. But desire, real desire, can't be forced, and when it is, it becomes something else entirely. Thank you for walking through this tangled, tender, and terrifying history with me. If this story made you think or feel something you didn't expect, I hope you'll stick around. There are more echoes waiting to be heard. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and always question the stories we're told, especially the ones whispered in the dark.